Hi, this is Jacob here. So this is a unit about the judicial branch of American government for 12th graders that I have taught before and kind of refined, and I'm really excited to share. So the essential question of the unit is, what is the role and significance of the judicial branch of American government? And when you look at the content and smaller essential questions throughout the unit, you'll see that they kind of fall into three categories. So the first is basic breakdown of the American court and legal system. Uh, that is where the unit begins, and that is where the most direct instruction in the unit is centered. Then we have part that I find the most interesting, which is constitutional rights and specific Supreme Court cases. And this is where student creativity will really get to shine, and this is where the summative unit assessment is based. And then throughout the unit, the part that I think serves as the best hook for the unit for students centers around the current state of the criminal justice system and how it could be improved. This is something that I also use to bring in a social justice component into the unit, and it's a great opportunity for students to share their experiences and integrate multiple sources of evidence with those experiences as well. So the summative unit assessment is to present to the class in a landmark U.S. Supreme Court case, incorporating newly acquired knowledge on the judicial branch into the presentation. Now, as we'll see, I scaffold that and narrow it down to about a dozen Supreme Court cases that I find to be the most significant in American history, yet also interesting, and allow students to pick, although by all means they may choose a significant court case outside of that if it is approved by me. So standards here are integrating information from diverse sources, both primary and secondary, into a coherent understanding of an idea or event, noting discrepancies among sources. That is a common core standard. In addition to students summarize landmark U.S. Supreme Court interpretations of the Constitution and its amendments. So these standards you'll see become especially apparent in the second week once we have our knowledge foundation. We'll look at both integrating these different sources of knowledge into an understanding of the criminal justice system, and their summative assessment involves the Supreme Court interpretations of the Constitution. I just want to, before we get to the specific days, I just want to talk real quick about connections, literary strategy, and how I'll be differentiating. So, as I said earlier, I try and make it so that the cases that we are looking at, such as Terry versus Ohio, which involves police stop and frisk policy, and the Regents of the University of California, famous Supreme Court case dealing with affirmative action, are cases we're discussing that are relevant to student lives, and all students, even if they're not always interested in this class, have opinions about these issues, and it's something that students can easily understand rather than a more complex or boring to some students legal issue. As for differentiation, as you'll see later, and with actually a lesson plan that I submitted as well, differentiation involves first multiple modes of sources, so video, song, text, discussion, but students also have scaffolding through pre-highlighted text, sentence starters during our class discussion, so that students who are a little shyer, maybe English language learners as well, are more comfortable speaking, and several others here. So I lay out the outline of the unit using this pre-given template, but I just want to run down a few highlights of the unit as well. So again, here we begin with with reactivating prior knowledge about what students know about the judicial branch, because we do learn in the first unit of the government curriculum some basics of the judicial branch. We introduce the idea of judicial restraint and judicial activism. This first day connects with even the summative assessment at the end of the 2 weeks, because students will be mentioning judicial restraint or judicial activism to answer a question about the Supreme Court case that they research. We also have student-centered discussion around why there are 9 Supreme Court justices, something I'm very interested in. Then we use the stop and frisk case as an example here of what I expect them to do for their summative assessment, analyzing what the case was about, what clause or amendment of the Constitution is being debated, or what constitutional right is being debated, what the arguments were on each side, how the Supreme Court voted. So these are all critical elements of the stop and frisk case, which I use to model for students what they will eventually be doing for me. As you can see here, I scaffold by giving them some pre-given resources as well. Then we get to my favorite lesson of the unit, which centers around the criminal justice system. So I integrate text from the new Jim Crow, best-selling book by Michelle Alexander, and J. Cole, a really popular rapper and hip-hop artist among my students. I integrate his lyrics from his song Neighbors on the criminal justice system and its potential flaws. He, after being successful and living in a really affluent neighborhood in his hometown in North Carolina, the police he'd have some really negative interactions with the police that he publicized in that song. And we watch Cory Booker discussing criminal justice reform as well. So integrating these three texts, we have a student-centered discussion on that topic. And I linked to that lesson plan in here as well if you'd like to look at it in more detail. And then finally, students have their summative assessment, which is picking one of these very famous Supreme Court cases and modeling their presentation based off of what I modeled for them here, answering these Supreme Court cases. So it's about a 2-week unit overlooking kind of these three components: the outline of the legal and justice system, how our judicial system works, then looking at specific constitutional rights through Supreme Court cases that the students present, so empowering students to teach rather than only hearing my voice, increasing student voice, and lastly, making it relevant to them through discussion of the criminal justice system. Thank you for listening.